I told my boyfriend I wanted an open relationship because I didn't want to cheat with my ex. I thought I was being mature. He thought I was giving him a breakup speech. A week later, I was single, blocked. And my ex? Turns out he just wanted attention. I'm Sabrina, I'm 19, and this whole thing started because I was just trying to be honest about what I wanted instead of lying like other girls do. But apparently, honesty isn't what guys actually want, despite what they always say. So, I'd been with Mikey for like 8 months, right? And don't get me wrong, he was sweet and all that, always texting me good morning, bringing me those fancy coffees I like between my classes, doing the whole thoughtful boyfriend thing. He works in some computer thing that honestly makes my brain shut off when he talks about it, and I do retail part-time, which isn't glamorous but whatever. The point is, we had this nice little routine going. He'd pick me up after work, we'd grab dinner, watch Netflix, the whole domestic thing that everyone says is so great when you're in love. But here's the thing, nobody wants to admit sometimes nice gets boring as hell. Like, Mikey was so predictable. Every Friday, he'd suggest the same 3 restaurants. Every weekend, he wanted to stay in and organize something or plan our future or whatever. And I'm 19, you know? I should be having fun, not settling into some old married couple routine already. But I didn't want to hurt his feelings by saying that because he really was trying to be a good boyfriend. Then Chris started texting me again, my ex, Chris. And before anyone starts judging, it wasn't like I reached out first or anything. He just sent me this random message asking how I was doing. Probably saw something on my social media that reminded him of when we dated. Chris and I had this whole intense thing for almost 2 years before it got complicated and we broke up. He was my first everything, if you know what I mean. And honestly, being with him felt like actually living instead of just existing. At first, I thought about not responding because obviously, I'm with Mikey now and I didn't want drama. But it was just a friendly text, right? Nothing wrong with being polite to an ex, especially one I actually cared about. So I texted back, just casual stuff about school and work. But then he started remembering all these inside jokes we used to share, sending me pictures of places we went together with little comments like, remember this, with heart emojis and stuff. I'm not going to lie, it felt good. Really good. Like, with Mikey, everything was so serious and planned out. He'd literally ask permission before kissing me sometimes, which I guess is respectful but also kind of kills the moment, you know. Chris was never like that. He was spontaneous, passionate, kept me guessing. When we were together, I felt like the most interesting person in the world, not just some girlfriend he was checking boxes with. I started looking forward to Chris's texts more than Mikey's good morning messages. And I know how that sounds, but it's not like I was doing anything wrong. We were just talking, catching up, being friendly. I wasn't cheating or anything, just enjoying having someone to talk to who actually got my sense of humor and didn't want to discuss our 5-year plan every other conversation. Maybe I got a little distant with Mikey during this time, but honestly, he was being kind of clingy anyway, always wanting to know what I was thinking about, asking if everything was okay when I took more than 10 minutes to text back. It was suffocating. When he'd ask what was wrong, I'd tell him nothing was wrong. He was just being paranoid because nothing was wrong. I was just talking to an old friend. The thing is, I started remembering why I felt for Chris in the first place, how exciting everything felt with him, how alive I felt around him. With Mikey, I felt safe and comfortable, but comfortable isn't the same as happy, is it? I'm too young to settle for comfortable. I should be experiencing things, exploring who I am, not playing house with the first nice guy who came along. But I also didn't want to just throw away what I had with Mikey. He really was good to me, and breaking up would be this whole dramatic thing that I didn't want to deal with. Plus, what if things with Chris didn't work out? Then I'd have given up something real for something that might not even happen. That seemed stupid. That's when I started thinking there might be another way, a better way. I'd heard about open relationships before, seen articles online about how they actually make couples stronger because there's more honesty and communication. People who are secure enough to handle that level of trust and openness, maybe that was the solution. Instead of having to choose between what I had and what I wanted, maybe I could have both. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. Wouldn't it be better to be honest about having feelings for someone else instead of sneaking around like most people do? Isn't that more mature than just cheating behind his back? I was trying to do the right thing here, to handle this like an adult instead of some teenager who can't control her impulses. So yeah, I started researching open relationships, reading about couples who made it work, learning the right terminology so I could present this properly. This wasn't some crazy idea I came up with to justify cheating, this was a legitimate relationship structure that lots of evolved people use. I found all these articles about ethical non-monogamy and how it can actually strengthen trust between partners when done right. I was nervous about bringing it up with Mikey, but I figured if he really loved me and trusted me, he'd at least be willing to discuss it. I wasn't asking him to immediately say yes to everything, just to have an open conversation about what we both wanted and needed. That's what healthy couples do, right? They talk about difficult topics instead of just pretending everything's perfect when it's not. The perfect opportunity came when we were watching some movie with a cheating subplot. I paused it and made a comment about how ridiculous it was that people sneak around instead of just being honest about wanting to explore other connections. Mikey looked confused, so I started explaining how there are other ways to handle attraction to other people besides just ignoring it or cheating. I told him we're both young, maybe we shouldn't limit ourselves to just one person at 19 and 20, that we could set boundaries, be completely honest with each other, and explore things while still maintaining our connection. I used all the right terms: ethical non-monogamy, evolved relationship structures, mature communication. I explained how this could actually bring us closer together because we'd be sharing everything instead of hiding things the whole time. While I was talking, I was thinking about how amazing this could be, finally being able to act on all this tension with Chris without the guilt, while still keeping the security and sweetness I had with Mikey. It seemed like the perfect solution to a complicated situation. But Mikey's face went through like 10 different expressions while I was explaining everything. He didn't look excited or intrigued like I'd hoped. He looked confused, then hurt, then suspicious. When I finished my whole speech about how this could work for us, he was quiet for way too long. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading: did I have someone specific in mind? I tried to play it off like this was just theoretical, just something I'd been thinking about in general terms, but he kept pushing, asking more direct questions. I could see in his eyes that he already knew the answer. When he straight up asked about Chris, my heart started pounding. I had to admit we'd been talking, but I tried to frame it like it was completely innocent, just old friends catching up, nothing inappropriate. I swore nothing had happened between us, which was technically true, but I could tell Mikey wasn't buying it. He wanted to know why I hadn't mentioned we were talking, and I got defensive. I told him I don't have to report every conversation I have with every person, that he was being possessive and insecure. But really, I was just mad that he was making this into some big dramatic thing instead of seeing the brilliant logic of what I was suggesting. Instead of being grateful that I was being honest instead of just cheating like other girlfriends would do, he was acting like I'd already betrayed him somehow. We ended up having this huge fight where he kept asking pointed questions I didn't want to answer, and I kept trying to turn it around on him for not trusting me enough for this kind of mature relationship. We went to bed that night with all this tension between us, and I lay awake thinking about how to make him understand that this really could work for both of us if he'd just be open-minded about it. The next morning, Mikey brought it up again, and I could tell he'd spent the whole night thinking about it too, but not in a good way. He wanted specifics, exactly when Chris started texting me, what we'd been talking about, whether I'd made plans to see him. I tried to keep my answers vague because, honestly, it was none of his business. But he wasn't letting it go this time. He kept pushing and pushing until I had to admit that Chris and I had met for coffee a few weeks ago, just as friends. Nothing happened. But I could see Mikey's whole expression change when I said it. He asked why I told him I was working late that night instead of just saying I was getting coffee with a friend. I tried to explain that I didn't think it was a big deal, that I didn't want him to get the wrong idea about something completely innocent. But he wasn't buying that either. He pointed out that I'd been distant lately, that I'd been lying about small things, that I clearly had this whole open relationship idea because I wanted to be with Chris specifically. I got so frustrated because he was making me sound calculating and dishonest when really I was just trying to figure out my feelings while being considerate of his. I told him his reaction was exactly why I hadn't mentioned the coffee thing. He was being jealous and possessive instead of trusting me. But Mikey wasn't backing down this time. He said if I wanted to explore things with other people, especially Chris, then maybe I should just break up with him and do that. He said he didn't want to be someone's backup plan while they figured out what they really wanted. I tried to explain that it wasn't like that the open relationship thing would actually help us both grow as people, that lots of couples make this work and are happier for it. I told him he was being closed-minded and traditional, that he was letting insecurity ruin something that could be really good for us. The more I talked, the more frustrated I got because he was completely missing the point. I wasn't trying to replace him or make him a backup plan. I was trying to be honest about having feelings for someone else instead of just suppressing them or cheating. Isn't that what you're supposed to do in a healthy relationship? Be honest about everything. Finally, he asked me point blank if I wanted to sleep with Chris, and I froze. This was it, the moment where I could either lie and try to convince him this was all theoretical, or I could be completely honest and hope he'd appreciate my maturity and openness. I chose honesty. I told him that yes, I had feelings for Chris, yes, I'd been thinking about him, but that's exactly why the open relationship made sense. Instead of sneaking around or breaking up, we could handle this like adults. I explained that it didn't mean I loved him any less, just that I wasn't ready to close off other possibilities at 19. I thought he'd appreciate my honesty, but instead, his whole demeanor changed. He got this cold, distant look and told me I was basically asking for permission to cheat with my ex while keeping him around as a safety net. I tried to argue that it's not cheating if we both agree to it, that open relationships are built on trust and communication, but I could see I was losing him. He asked why I didn't just break up with him if I wanted to be with Chris, and I struggled to explain without sounding selfish. The truth was, I wanted both the stability and sweetness Mikey gave me and the excitement and passion I felt with Chris. I didn't see why I had to choose when there was a perfectly reasonable alternative that could work for everyone. But Mikey wasn't seeing it as reasonable at all. He said I was trying to have my cake and eat it too, using fancy relationship terminology to justify what was basically just wanting to cheat. He said if I was already emotionally invested in someone else, then our relationship was already over whether I wanted to admit it or not. The whole conversation spiraled from there, with both of us saying things we probably shouldn't have. I accused him of being immature and insecure, of not being evolved enough to handle a progressive relationship structure. He said I was being selfish and manipulative, trying to rewrite the rules after already breaking them. By the end of it, we weren't even talking about open relationships anymore. We were just fighting about trust and honesty and what we both wanted from this relationship. Honestly, I started to think maybe we weren't as compatible as I thought if he couldn't even consider what I was suggesting. After that fight, Mikey didn't break up with me right away, which gave me hope that maybe I could still fix this. For a few days, we barely talked, both of us processing what had happened. I convinced myself he just needed time to think about it logically, that once he got past the initial emotional reaction, he'd see that my suggestion actually showed how much I valued our relationship. I spent hours researching successful open relationships online, finding testimonials and articles I could show him to prove this wasn't some crazy idea. I even found forums where people talked about how much stronger their relationships became after opening them up. I screenshotted quotes and saved links, building a whole case for why this could work for us. During this weird, tense period, Chris kept texting me, asking how things went with my boyfriend. I found myself venting to him about how unreasonable Mikey was being, how he was making the whole thing about trust when really it was about personal growth, personal honesty. Chris was so understanding, telling me that some people just aren't mature enough for open relationships, that it takes a special kind of emotional intelligence to handle that level of honesty. His validation felt amazing after days of Mikey's cold shoulder and disappointed looks. Chris got it in a way that Mikey clearly didn't. He understood that this wasn't about not loving your partner, it was about being honest about your needs instead of pretending they don't exist. I started spending more time texting Chris and less time trying to fix things with Mikey. I justified it by telling myself that Mikey obviously didn't want to talk anyway, so why should I keep trying if he wanted to be stubborn and traditional instead of working with me to find a solution that was his choice. When Mikey finally brought up the subject again, it wasn't to discuss boundaries or logistics like I'd hoped. Instead, he sat me down and told me he'd been thinking about everything I said, and he'd realized that what I was really asking for was permission to explore a relationship with Chris while keeping him around as a safety net. He said he couldn't be in a relationship with someone who was actively pursuing their ex, regardless of what fancy label I put on it. He told me that maybe open relationships work for some people, but not for him, and definitely not when one person already has someone else picked out. I tried to argue that he was being dramatic, that lots of people have successful open relationships, that he was letting jealousy cloud his judgment. But he cut me off and said something that really stuck with me. He said, if I wanted to be with Chris, I should just be with Chris. But I couldn't have both of them. He told me he deserved to be with someone who actually wanted to be monogamous with him, not someone who was constantly looking elsewhere. He said the fact that I even suggested it told him everything he needed to know about where my head was at. This wasn't the reaction I expected at all. I thought he might be hurt, maybe angry, but I didn't expect this calm, decisive response. I realized he was actually serious about ending things, and suddenly the security I'd been taking for granted felt like it was slipping away. I tried to backtrack, telling him that Chris wasn't that important to me, that I was just confused, and maybe we should forget the whole open relationship idea. But it was too late. Mikey said he couldn't trust that I wouldn't just bring this up again in a few months when I got bored or when Chris came around again. He said he'd rather end things now while he still had some self-respect left than wait around for me to decide whether he was good enough for me. The conversation ended with him saying he needed space to think, and I was left wondering how my brilliant plan had gone so completely wrong. A week later, Mikey officially broke up with me over text, not even a phone call, after 8 months together. Just a straightforward message saying he was done and wished me well. I was furious that he didn't even have the decency to do it in person, but also secretly relieved because now I could finally pursue things with Chris without any guilt or complications. I immediately texted Chris to tell him I was single, expecting him to be excited and ready to pick up where we left off. His response was lukewarm at best. He said he was sorry things didn't work out with my boyfriend, but that he'd been thinking about things too. Over the next few days, his texts became less frequent and more distant. When I suggested meeting up again, he kept making excuses about being busy with work or hanging out with friends. I started getting this sinking feeling that maybe Chris wasn't as interested as I thought he was. After a week of increasingly desperate attempts to get his attention, sending longer texts, trying to be funnier, asking about his day, I finally confronted him about what was happening. I asked if he was having second thoughts about us reconnecting, if maybe he was intimidated by the fact that I'd just gotten out of a relationship. That's when he dropped the bomb that completely destroyed everything. He told me he'd been seeing someone new, a girl he met through work, and things were getting serious between them. He said that while he enjoyed reconnecting with me and catching up on old times, he wasn't looking to get back into anything complicated. He actually had the nerve to suggest that we probably shouldn't keep texting since we were both in different places now, and he didn't want to give his new girlfriend the wrong idea, like I was some kind of threat that needed to be managed instead of someone he'd been flirting with for weeks. I was completely devastated and furious. I realized that while I was playing games and trying to engineer this perfect situation where I could have everything I wanted, Chris was just enjoying the ego boost of having his ex chase after him. He was never actually available or interested in anything serious with me. He was just bored and enjoying the attention while he was dating someone else. The irony wasn't lost on me. I destroyed a perfectly good relationship with someone who genuinely cared about me for someone who was never actually an option. I gave up Mikey's loyalty and love for Chris's casual interest and validation, and now I had nothing. I tried to reach out to Mikey a few times, testing the waters to see if there was any chance of fixing things. I sent him a few texts apologizing for how everything went down, saying I'd been confused and made a mistake, but he never responded to any of them. When I saw him around campus, he was polite but distant, treating me like an acquaintance rather than someone he once loved. It was like he'd completely moved on, like our 8 months together meant nothing to him anymore. Through mutual friends, I heard he was dating someone new pretty quickly after our breakup, some girl from his program who apparently found his computer talk fascinating instead of boring. They seemed really happy together from what I could see on social media, posting pictures of coffee dates and study sessions, doing all the same things we used to do but somehow looking more genuine about it. 3 months after everything fell apart, I ran into them together at a restaurant downtown. I was there with some friends, trying to have a good time and move on with my life. When I saw them at a corner table, Mikey looked completely relaxed and happy, laughing at something she was saying, holding her hand across the table. She was everything I wasn't, completely focused on him, asking questions about his work like she actually cared about the answers, looking at him like he was the most interesting person in the world. Watching them together, I felt this stab of jealousy and regret that I tried to push down. But I also felt angry. Why couldn't he have been that relaxed and happy with me? Why did I have to be the bad guy for wanting something more exciting than his boring routine? Maybe if he'd been more spontaneous, more passionate, more like Chris, I never would have looked elsewhere in the first place. I never admitted out loud that I made a mistake because, honestly, I'm not sure I did. I was just trying to be honest about what I wanted instead of settling for something that wasn't making me completely happy. Maybe Mikey and I just weren't compatible if he couldn't handle that level of honesty and openness. I told friends that the breakup was mutual, that we just wanted different things and realized we weren't right for each other long term. I painted myself as the mature one who was honest about having feelings for someone else instead of cheating behind his back like most people would do. But late at night, when I was scrolling through social media and seeing all the couple photos and relationship milestones I was missing out on, I couldn't help but feel like maybe I'd been too hasty, not about wanting more. I still think I deserve to explore my options at 19, but maybe about the way I handled everything. The truth is, I'm lonelier now than I've ever been. Every guy I meet seems either boring like Mikey or unavailable like Chris. I keep hoping I'll find someone who can give me both the security and the excitement I was looking for, but it's been months and nothing's worked out. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just been satisfied with what I had, if I'd ignored Chris's texts and focused on making things work with Mikey. But then I remember how suffocated I felt, how young I am, how much I still want to experience. I refuse to feel guilty for knowing what I want and going after it, even if it didn't work out the way I planned. Maybe someday I'll find someone who's secure enough to handle an open relationship, someone who understands that love doesn't have to mean limiting yourself to just one person forever. Until then, I'm focusing on myself and not settling for less than I deserve, no matter what anyone else thinks about my choices.